is the first human footstep on the moon, and the world is forever changed.
Fantastic feeling. It was one of great accomplishment.
It was almost miraculous.
We did it for all the right reasons. We did come in peace for all mankind.
On July 20th, 1969, as the lunar dust compresses beneath the boot of astronaut Neil Armstrong, NASA's Apollo project scores a bullseye. Until the fall of 1957, the moon is Earth's only satellite, orbiting for eons in silent vigil. That October, the hush of space and America's sense of security is shattered by Sputnik. The sound of the Soviet satellite becomes eerily familiar to Americans. Fears escalate that the Cold War could heat up with catastrophic effect.
Immediately everyone thought, well, they're now able to really send their military machines around the world up above. Who was not going to be in danger?
President Eisenhower combined several agencies working on rocketry and flight to create one civilian agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Over the next years, the United States successfully launches satellites with great scientific payback. To prepare for human flight, several animals, including a chimpanzee named Ham, survived the ride to space and back. But once again, these American accomplishments are eclipsed by the Soviet space machine. April 12, 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin becomes the first human in space. To temper this latest Soviet triumph, the U.S. needs to put its own man in space. That man is astronaut Alan Shepard.
1.2 G. Shepard's flight had tremendous impact. I think it was the leading technological accomplishment of that era, and led to the whole future of the exploration to the moon.
Unlike Gagarin's 108-minute orbit of Earth, Shepard's suborbital flight, the nation's lone human venture into space, lasts just 15 minutes. Nonetheless, President Kennedy goes before Congress and lays down the gauntlet.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The combination of the Gagarin flight and the Bay of Pigs disaster with Cuba, I think, pushed Kennedy towards something that would be positive and would show that we were ahead of the Soviet Union.
President Kennedy's interest in space moves beyond just beating the Soviets. As his passion grows, so does his rhetoric.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
It will take an all-out effort by thousands of dedicated Americans to design and build the machines and methodologies needed to succeed, one small step at a time.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
February 20th, 1962. John Glenn circumnavigates the Earth 3 times.
The single most important factor was that man could survive and perform as well at 0 gravity as he could at 1 G.
0 G, and I feel fine.
By May 1963, the U.S. Mercury program flies 6 manned flights. But the last, Gordon Cooper's 34-hour solo mission, still leaves the moon out of America's reach. The Gemini program is the next step. Its larger capsule carries 2 astronauts. Mercury veteran Gus Grissom flies with John Young aboard Gemini 3, the program's first manned flight. On Gemini 4, Ed White opens the hatch and steps out into the void as America's first spacewalker.
I feel like $1 million. I'm gonna pick up.
Extravehicular activity, EVA, in NASA speak, is critical to a moon mission.
Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Engine start.
So too is the ability of two spacecraft to meet up or rendezvous in space. It happens on Jim Lovell's first flight.
The first rendezvous, Gemini 6 with Gemini 7, I think was a magnificent milestone in the quest to go to the moon, because we had to determine the types of rendezvous that we want to do around the moon, and we first had it just about around the Earth.
By Gemini's 12th and final mission, rendezvous and docking are well practiced.
Gemini 12, Houston, Capcom, 1 minute to LOS. New EVA record, beautiful job.
NASA is now ready to shoot for the moon. But there are just 3 years left to meet President Kennedy's goal, and no one really knows how close the highly secretive Soviets are. And of the moon itself, little is known.
Could be dust up to 25, 30 feet thick. If you landed on it, you would sink into the moon. If you landed on it and set out some fire from the rockets, exhaust, it would cause this huge inferno on the lunar surface. What were the radiation problems on the moon from the sun? What were the thermal conditions you had to deal with on the lunar surface?
Getting answers falls to a series of robotic spacecraft. In mid-1966, Surveyor 1 lands on the lunar surface. The 11,000 photos it sends back help to dispel fear and clear the way for the Apollo moon landing program. 2 short months after the final Gemini flight, astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee are posing for photos and spending hours in simulators as they prepare for the first Apollo mission less than a month away. January 27th, 1967. The crew is in the capsule, mounted atop an unfueled Saturn 1B for a dress rehearsal of the countdown sequence.
Now we're going to get the moon. We can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings.
A series of problems has already raised tensions at the launch pad. When 5.5 hours into the test, Ed White's shouts are heard.
At that point, things progressed with absolutely stunning speed. I mean, it was only a matter of 20 seconds before the crew was unconscious. Moments later, the pressure from the fire had increased to the point where it literally ruptured the hull of the spacecraft. Toxic smoke spewed into the White Room. The technicians were struggling to get the hatch open and rescue the crew, but they were driven back by the intense heat and the smoke. Many long minutes passed before they could open the hatch, and of course by that point the crew had died. All 3 astronauts were dead.
The loss of Grissom, White, and Chaffee momentarily cripples NASA's moon landing program. But as the 3 astronauts are given heroes' burials, Apollo, like another mythological figure, Phoenix, begins its rise from the ashes. Following recommendations of an accident review board, the Apollo Command Module is redesigned and rewired for safety, all under the wary eye of the astronauts who will fly it.